Hello, everybody. This is a mail space for another episode of the Mansplainers. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Stephen Baskerville. So, Stephen, who do we have here with us today, and what are we going to talk about?
Well, Bradley, I'm very keen, very pleased to have our guest today, Rick Bradford, who some of you may know. I can mention your pen name, can't I,
Of
Rick?
course you
Uh,
can, yeah, of course.
yeah, some of you know as William Collins, and he's written several books, one of which I happen to have right here, The Empathy Gap, which covers many, if not all, of the issues that men face today. Some people consider this to be essentially the Bible of the men's rights generally movement and men's rights program. And but um, and Rick also maintains also in the name of William Collins, he also maintains a blog which has a number of interesting a lot of interesting pieces on it. We were going to discuss one today. One grabbed my attention, and that was on the great J.D. Unwin and some connected writers who talked about the role of sexual deviance, sexual degeneracy, and feminism in the decline of civilizations. And Rick gave a very good, I thought, very good take, very clarifying take on that, because Unwin's book is very big. There used to be an abridged edition, but it's I think it's gone out of print. So um, that's it. Sex and Culture. Yeah, it's like 700 pages long with the footnotes and everything. So it's very good to have his précis of it, and I'd like to do a future show in which we do talk about that. But there's been a new development just the last few days, and so we persuaded Rick. He agreed readily to refocus our show on this, and that is an extraordinary video that was just produced by Tucker Carlson and his team, called "Fathers Wanted" on the fatherhood crisis, which he then followed up, I think just today or yesterday, with an interview with the producer Terry Schilling, as I recall. And it's really quite an extraordinary piece of work. Now, Carlson is long, just by way of introduction, I've followed Carlson on this issue, and I think he's genuinely and sincerely very concerned about issues of the family and specifically fatherhood. And I notice he sneaks little asides into his commentaries. He's done this over the years, which he doesn't exactly take on men's issues or become a spokesman for men, let alone fathers. But he does, get these things in there as if they need to be on the agenda. So I'm sure that his interest in it is genuine. But many of his commentaries, when he talks about it in an extended way, he's done a series of interviews recently, I think have a lot to be desired. He's beaten around the bush. He's been gotten in the habit of other tradcons of scolding and nagging men to get married, without any, you know, reference or consideration of the injustices of the family courts or the many other difficulties that arise that prevent men from getting married today. And but this video is really uh, a whole other um, order of magnitude. It's really frankly, it's unbelievably awful. It's many ways a throwback to the old fatherhood programs of the 1990s and early 2000s. And so we thought it was worth diverting our attention to this show, these two films that he came out with, and there's nobody better to do that with than Rick Bradford. So we're going to take it from there. I think I've given enough of a kind of introduction to the video for those who haven't seen it. We'll post a link to the two videos. But we want to talk about I think especially two aspects of this. One is there is a historical dimension that I'd like to discuss a bit, and that is these fatherhood programs from the 19 early on, which in many ways this is just a recycled version. It's quite unbelievable, and then also there's the whole fatherhood dating male female relationship has really taken on huge dimensions that people of my generation are often not aware of, and I'm hoping Rick and Bradley will talk about that a bit because it's the marriage market, the dating market is many ways in free fall today. So it's a complicated process, and I hope this video gives us a news hook to really galvanize attention to some of these issues. So, Rick, welcome to the show. If I haven't, I didn't give a very complete biography of you. If you want to add anything else to it, please do, and tell us what you think about. Have I given I've given a superficial overview of this. Please feel free to dive into what other aspect of this you think is merits our attention.
Yes, okay. Thanks for that, Stephen. I'm not sure I want to say any more about my biography. I think the important thing, as far as your audience is concerned, is that I am indeed William Collins as well as Rick Bradford, and so as you've said, I have several books on sort of gender issues or gender politics, as well as my website, empathygap.uk. So that's the most important thing. I mean, if you want to know a bit more of my background, I'm a retired engineer and theoretical physicist. So that's my technical background. So the things that I talk about, well, whether it be politics or gender politics, are not my professional area. These are my views as, a man in society rather than as a professional in any capacity. So I think that's all you need to know about me. In terms of this so-called documentary that has appeared on Tucker Carlton's network channel, yeah, it irritates me as much as it evidently irritates you, Stephen, and indeed Bradley. Um, but I want to expose the reason why we find it so irritating. Because superficially, and this is the danger of these sorts of programs, because superficially it may come across even to conservatives as being sympathetic in some way to the male issue, or
Mhm.
at least positive in some way. So let's just give a potted summary of what it does. Well, and it does some rather disparate things, and therein lies the problem. Because on the one hand, it presents some statistics on the catastrophically falling average fertility, which I believe, if I remember correctly from the program in the States, is now 1.6 something. It also makes reference to statistics on, and I think this is gender neutral. It says the percentage of people in the US, the people in the US that don't want to get married, which I think he quoted it as 40%, which is a very high percentage. Doesn't say whether that's predominantly men or women. But on the other hand, and what the documentary, so-called, is primarily about, is about extolling the virtues of fatherhood. Both from the point of view of the individual man, because being a father is a fulfilling thing and it gives your life a sense of meaning, and also because of the sociological significance of stable fatherhood, its relationship to stable families, and stable families are the stuff out of which stable and positive-looking societies are made. So, on the face of it, what's not to like? Because pointing out the decline of average fertility, it's factually true and it's important, and there's nothing wrong with pointing it out. Indeed, I point it out myself regularly. Similarly, the turning away from marriage is something that you and I, Stephen, have both talked about passionately, and it's not a good thing. And we would both agree also passionately on the benefits of fatherhood. So, what is it exactly we're objecting to, given that that is apparently the factual content of the programme? The reason is, at least the way I would put it, is
Could I
because
just underscore what you just said? Because I think I meant to say that at the beginning. I think many people who don't know the underlying context, the larger context, and the underlying reasons for this, will be very tempting to believe that this is a sympathetic treatment of fatherhood and men and fathers themselves. And it's really there's a sleight of hand going on here, a very subtle sleight of hand, but a very profound one that has been going on for a long time among these traditional conservatives like Carlson.
yes,
But so go
yeah,
ahead,
yes.
give us your.
Yes, exactly. You take the words out of my mouth. Traditional conservatism and its failures is what lies behind this. Because the what's been done here is they're apparently taking two disparate things. On the other hand, on one hand, the benefits of fatherhood, and on the other hand, these concerning statistics about birth rate and marriage rate. And by juxtaposing those, they give the impression that one is the cause of the other. In other words, that the declining popularity of marriage, and in particular, the declining average fertility, is in some way because feckless men are not, you know, standing up for marriage and doing the right thing. That it's somehow men's fault, and this impression, although I don't think is ever actually stated in the documentary, but that impression is reinforced certainly by what Tucker Carlson says himself at the very end of the documentary, in which he chooses to lambast men who, run away from their
Mm.
commitments to family. And he's right to do so. And of course, there will be instances of genuine deadbeat dads who deserve to be criticised. But that's not what the film is actually about, because the film is actually about the broad thrust of our societies. And to give the impression that by including that clip, that the broad thrust of the problem is coming from feckless dads is precisely what we object to, because it's simply empirically false. And it's very easy to
Could
demonstrate
I
that it's false.
Exactly. Could I just underscore that? I think it's important. Tom Golden put it very succinctly in his commentary and Substack on this. He said that you're right. First of all, you're right. They don't come out and say it. They don't actually say it's the father's fault. But that is the implication. And Tom Golden put it very well. He said what they do say basically is that the fatherhood crisis is the result of male behavior.
Mhm.
It's the result of male behavior. It's not the result of government policies. It's not the result of feminist ideology. It's the result of male behavior. And just the and that other point that you made about Carlson at the end of his video saying that scolding men for abandoning their children. That again, he doesn't say that, but this was very much a throwback to the programs of the 1990s where they said this repeatedly and over again that the fatherhood, and they said it quite explicitly, the fatherhood crisis is the result of men abandoning their children. And it is not,
Yeah,
as you say, it is not, yes, we can find examples of it, but it's not the cause of the problem
no,
under
no,
discussion.
no, no, it isn't.
Go ahead.
It's a minor issue compared to the wholesale destruction we're actually seeing. Before I move on to that, it's worth just pausing on the nature of this subtle implication, because I'm afraid it reminds me of a very powerful propaganda technique, um, which is used commonly in the media to give people an impression that one thing causes another without the inconvenience of ever having to present any argument or evidence to that effect. All you do is juxtapose them in the same brief statement,
Yeah.
and you give people the impression
Mhm.
that the one has caused the other without the inconvenience of ever saying it, without being accused of mendacity, because there's no actual thing you've ever said which you can pin down as being false. And you don't have to produce any evidence or any argument. It's a brilliant propaganda technique, and it's extremely distressing to see somebody who it probably is, as you say, Stephen, genuinely concerned about family, actually using this sort of technique is profoundly dishonest. And of course, it's dishonest because it gives very much the wrong impression. So let me proceed then to a bit more detail of just how wrong that is. And what I want to do ultimately is bring out a whole range of issues um, that point to what you see. They haven't named the problem. That's the issue here. Instead of naming the problem, they've given a false impression of what the problem is, namely feckless men. And they've avoided naming the problem, but we're going to name the problem. Let's name the problem now without any more prevarication. Feminism is what lies behind these things, and it operates in a number of different ways.
Mm.
You can actually write down on a bit of paper, and I actually took the trouble to do this morning out of interest. You can write down all the different pathways that lead to fatherlessness, which is what we're talking about, actually. That's really what we're talking about. And there are many of them. It's not just the family courts. As Bradley reminded us before we came on air, there's also the sexual marketplace, the catastrophic failure of that. And in fact, there's a number of points between those two extremes that come in, which I'd like to sort of go through and itemize. But if you look at them, although not every one is solely the fault of feminism, all of them have a feminist element in them,
Mhm.
and most often feminism is by far the leading issue that's causing it. So no matter how you argue it, you end up with that issue. Let me, though, just to get the ball rolling, go straight for the jugular
Mhm.
and look at some simple statistics from the UK, which immediately refute the idea that the blame for the falling fertility rate can possibly be men. And it's simply this. And I don't know if this works in other countries, yet I invite you to look at your data and see if it does. But certainly in the UK, this is the data. By the end of last year, 2025, there were in that year 680,000 live births. In that same year, there were 305,000 abortions. Okay? By the end of that year, the average fertility in the UK had fallen to 1.41. 1.41. That compares with 1.6 something in the US. So it's even worse in the UK. Now, what you can do with those numbers is you can ask a question. The question is, what would the average fertility have been if those abortions had not been carried out, but had instead been live births? And make no mistake, the vast majority of those abortions would have been live births of healthy children. Only a very, very small percentage would have been, stillbirths or serious abnormalities. Virtually all abortions are elective. So I invite the audience to do the arithmetic on that, but the answer is, and assuming that this applied not just last year, but for previous years. In other words, if we'd never had an abortion culture, if that had never happened, the average fertility, even last year in the UK, would have been 2.04. Now, the replacement rate is normally said to be about 2.1. I think actually it's a bit less than that. It's perhaps 2.08 or 2.06. So 2.04 is very, very close to replacement rate. So at least in the UK, you can say that, and this is a mind blur, isn't it? But you can say that the diminishing mean fertility is almost entirely a result of abortion. And perhaps pause at that point because that's such a hard-hitting claim that you might want to push back or offer a view on that.
Well, no, I think that's a point I think that is often ignored, at least in the men's circles. I'm sure the tradcons probably point that out. I would question though. I don't think you mean to imply that. I mean, there is a sense in which the men are the declining birth rate is coming from the men because the men are, we get the MGTOW and the men who are reacting to the obvious flagrant injustices of the family, well, the welfare system, first of all, chronologically, and then their successor in the middle class, the divorce courts, which are um, these injustices are becoming more and more well known among the common knowledge among the general population, and men are refusing to marry. So there's no doubt. I don't think there can be any doubt that men are, as are women. Women for completely different reasons are refusing to marry and have children, but the men are doing the risk assessment, doing the calculation, and figure that marriage and childbearing is not worth it when you can be have your children confiscated and be thrown out of your home and be criminalized by the family courts. So I think there is a sense in which it is coming from the men, but we need to look at the larger context. And by the way, Carlson admits this. In one of these interviews he did earlier this year or last year, I think it was with Matt Walsh, they both sat there and said, "Yeah, the injustices of the divorce courts are horrendous. They're horrible," uh, and that's all. They moved on from there. They didn't describe it in any detail. They didn't go into it. They didn't get specific. And they just said, "Yes, but if you're a man, you man up and you do it. You take risks anyway. Life is full of risks for a man. So divorce, despite all these risks, never, no, not a word about doing risk assessments, um, especially with something as precious as your life and your children's lives, potential children's lives. So I think some of it does come from the refusal of women to marry for different reasons, but also from the refusal of men to marry. But also, as you say, even the few, even that we're continuing to have sex and have and have pregnancies, and yet even when we get that far in the which is getting more and more difficult to get that stage in the process, then for reasons I'm sure you and Bradley will explain, then what do? We abort the babies, that we've managed to at least sire and produce. So this you're right. There's all of these, by the way. I should add just something which may not be common knowledge, is that the feminists are not only behind the abortion epidemic, they're also behind the welfare system. They created it in the early 20th century, and they're also behind the divorce courts. They created those as well, and the no-fault divorce laws. They created those also. There isn't a word about that in Carlson's video either.
Right.
No, and of course there's not, and there's many different issues here. It's just for point of clarification, the claim that I was refuting there was that men were to blame for the
Right,
falling average fertility. You've got to
right,
distinguish clearly between that and and fatherlessness. Fatherlessness applies to children which do exist, but who don't have fathers, and that's a separate issue, and that's where the
right,
divorce courts comes in. Uh, so the two.
right,
There's misdirection in the documentary on both those issues. So I've presented an argument which, at least in the UK, to my mind, firmly refutes the first of those things in terms of the average decline in average fertility, which, if that argument is right, and I can't see anything wrong with it, it's it's um, it's irrefutable that it's coming entirely from women, because, of course, the women are aborting, and remember, of course, the mantra is "my body, my choice." So the feminists have made clear that women should have abortion rights available, and it should be their decision and their decision alone. So if you accept the statistics that abortion is what makes the difference between replacement rate fertility and what we've got in the UK, 1.4, if those numbers are right, and it's just arithmetic, that's all, then then it's indisputable that it's women driving it, because it's their body, their choice, and they're making that choice. But that's a separate issue from marriage and fatherlessness, which is, let's move into that then. Let's move into those issues. And as I said earlier, I tried writing down all the different pathways by which a man ends up not being a father. So it needn't, we might not be talking about fatherlessness in the sense of a child that exists but doesn't have an involved father. We might be talking about a man that never has an opportunity
Mm.
to become a father. So you start, as Bradley was reminding us earlier, with the sexual marketplace. Because unless a man and a woman get together, there ain't going to be no baby, right? So where do you start with that one? And let me expose something that's always bugged me. You see, these days people will take it as axiomatic. That starts with dating, but it doesn't. In fact, once you've accepted that that starts with dating, you're already well down the path of losing.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not where it should start. The relationship between men and women, or the pre-relationship, you should get to know the opposite sex. In you see the problem with dating is both sides must feel a horrible pressure because both sides know what's going on in dating. You're both being examined. I've always hated the very idea. You should you should get to know the opposite sex in their natural milieu, which is everyday life, preferably in the context of their family, because there's nothing like seeing people operate within their birth family to know what they're really like,
Mm.
but also with their friends and in non-pressured settings where there's no expectation that you're going to fancy that girl because there's lots of girls milling around and there's lots of blokes milling around. And there's no pressure, but you get to know people. That's how it should happen. It should happen as a byproduct of our social structure. So the fact that we're reliant, well, not only on dating, but goddamn dating apps, help us. It is just how badly far down the road of of social destruction we've gone because it shouldn't be necessary. It shouldn't be necessary. So, do you want to respond to that, Bradley? Is that
Yeah.
something that you've thought through as well?
Not only thought through, I've experienced it. As I've said to the audience several times, I'm in my mid 40s. Well, I mean, I'm getting to my late 40s now. I'm going to be 47 this summer. However, what I did not like about this documentary is that there was no mention, or I recall very little mention about the sexual market. And these men can simply say how great fatherhood is. And we all know that fatherhood is great. And I'm a father of two children myself. However, saying that, for like you said, does not even start the process of meeting a woman. And in this disordered sexual market that I experienced in the every single year of my teenage years was in the 90s, my early 20s was in the early 2000s, that this is a wreck. So they don't, and what I didn't like also, besides not even going over how disordered the sexual market is, and that would take an entire episode itself, is that they did have mention of Dan Bilzerian and Andrew Tate. But in a normal, healthy society, these two men would just very they would be dealt with and dealt with very severely or not even have the opportunity to do what they do. However, like Roger Devlin said, that in a unregulated sexual market, the there is a active rewarding of the vicious and a punishing of the virtuous. So if you're going to have this unregulated sexual marketplace, the men are going to mimic people like Dan Bilzerian or Andrew Tate because that's what works. How the stereotypical line that nice guys finish last is not just a it's just not just a line. In many cases, it is the truth. And these men did not mention any of that sort of stuff in this documentary. And also, like you're saying here, that it is so disordered that when you are meeting someone these days, I mean, even back in the 90s, also, when we could just simply go outside of our houses and not rely on the internet or dating apps or dating websites to meet people, you could just simply live your life and meet people of the opposite sex. Even then, that this was going on also. And being that it was so disordered and is disordered, that even when you are dating, you're not dating or getting to know someone that is a blank slate. when you're a man in this day and age, or previously, maybe not in all cases, but you're meeting a woman who is already involved with another man. You're involved with a woman who is has an ex-boyfriend lurking in the background, is talking to someone, seeing someone, and we know what talking and seeing someone means. So even if you do get the not every man, but many men, when they do meet a woman, they're not meeting a blank slate. They're meeting a woman with much drama already going on in the background, and you have to contend with this baggage. And not only do you have to contend with uh, previous baggage, you got to deal with baggage that's going on now. That they did not mention any of this sort of stuff in that documentary. It's not just the dating
No,
apps; it's the logistics of the sexual market that has been going on. Probably, I mean, I was born in '79, but this has been going on for a while, and I believe that in the '90s it was in free fall and has only gotten worse and worse and worse. So
mm,
where are all these people going to meet these fine blank slates that are ready for marriage? And pardon me for rambling here. I also want to say also that many of us did grow up with, like myself, I grew up with no dad for practically speaking, no dad. So in the lower middle class and with other people in the middle class and lower middle class, I've also worked in neighborhoods that were referred to as the so-called ghetto. When I see these pathologies first up and close of fatherlessness, uh, that even then we were not both men, young men and women, teenagers. When we recall sexual education, or we recall how many talks that we had with our own parents about marriage and the role of husbands, or just the role of fathers, we can't recall any education. So, how are you going to get people to be married if they're not trained to be husbands or wives or receiving any education on this whole process? And to top it off, what I remember from sexual education was simply two lines from health education class: no one get pregnant and everyone wear protection. Nothing further. Nothing further about motherhood, fatherhood, just nothing. So we're going to tell people coming up like this to get married. Or it's not just the divorce regime or the welfare state or the sexual market. We're not even trained to be husbands or fathers.
well, of course, you should be trained not in school, which I've never been in favour of sex
Right,
education in
right.
school anyway. You should be trained in inverted commas simply by growing up in a functional two-parent family. And I mean, I wasn't trained.
Well, I
I,
I
I
guess the
mean,
word
I went to a very old-fashioned school where we didn't really do sex education. We could get away with not doing it in those days, and I'm glad of it.
right. I guess the
But,
word
but
trained.
I had the
Yeah,
advantage of having a father and a mother who stayed together to the end, and
Right.
right,
These
right,
things are
who
passed down
any
from the
question
family,
of anything
passed down
else.
from father to son.
Yes,
right.
yes,
Yeah.
and this is why this is so pernicious, because once you get this ball rolling of fatherlessness, it gathers steam because for precisely the reason that Bradley has just very passionately explained that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because you don't know how to father because you've never been fathered. And incidentally, the same is happening with mothers. But I think new mothers these days are not very well versed in how to mother either. So the whole business is catastrophic. And I mean, I was going to point out something else in the sexual marketplace in terms of that you can um, well, fatherlessness comes down to feminism as well, of course, but there's a more direct influence of feminism on what I would see as the natural way of meeting the opposite sex in everyday life. I mean, one of them used to be you met the opposite sex at your place of work because that's where you spend most of your waking hours. So that was perfectly reasonable thing to. But now, what do we have? We have sexual harassment in the workplace. And are there any romances starting in the workplace anymore? And I mean, I've been out of the workplace a long time, but I'd be surprised if there were many because it's such a hazardous procedure, isn't it? And even in public now, I don't know about other countries, but in the UK, we have harassment in public laws, which are really quite draconian. So, we've been socially engineered by the most pathological people imaginable, and
Yes.
that's why and it's all been
Right.
translated into law.
Yes, I
I would
mean that.
also add that the other place
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I would also add that the other place that the courtship, where people learned the rules of courtship and began the process, was, of course, in their places of worship. And not only has that declined worship, especially in the UK, there's that excellent book by Calvin Brown on the what is it, the end of Christianity in Britain. But there's also not only have the faith itself and church attendance declined, but the rules, the control over the process of courtship dating uh, is passed from the church to the legal profession. And that was a very important step because what that did was it passed from an institution that had no incentive other than to solve the problem when there were marital problems, when there were dating problems, when there was, the churches had, for better or worse, however imperfectly, they had an incentive to encourage courtship, to encourage dating, to encourage the resolution of family difficulties, whereas the legal profession has exactly the opposite incentive. They have a pecuniary incentive to make the problems worse, to make dating and courtship dysfunctional, to make family problems intractable, and to make a fast buck on the process. So that was a huge step, I think, is the abdication of both the family itself and the places of worship as education centers for
Yes,
courtship.
and the significance of church is wider than what you've just described, of course, because the church also provides a social milieu in which you could meet the opposite sex in a way which is, pressure free and without any expectation, and also in a forum where you get to know them
Right.
without that pressure. So it provides that social context. And you're quite right about Britain, of course, in terms of no longer being Christian. And lest I mislead people, I should confess I'm not a Christian. So I have no axe to grind here, despite despite the fact I will sing the praises of Christianity in terms of its sociological significance. I don't have a vested interest in it in that sense. But yeah, Christianity is in catastrophic decline. It might be beginning to reverse. If you were naive and believed our last census in 2021, 45% of people in the UK are Christians. But that's a grossly misleading statistic because the vast majority of those are only nominally Christian. They're not regular churchgoers. If you ask the question, how many people are regular churchgoers in the UK, it's only 12%. And if you looked at the average age of congregations, it's probably about 70 or something. So I think there is a move now amongst some younger people on the right to move back to Christianity, but it's probably only a very small movement at the moment. And despite not being a Christian myself, it's something I would regard as wholly a good thing. That's slightly hypocritical of me, I suppose, but that's my position. Um, yeah. So
Could we go back? Excuse me, I was going to say I'd like to go back to the theme of Carlson's films because I think there's some I think maybe I mean, you've both provided an excellent description of how complex these issues have become, but I think for a lot of young people today, they won't know the recent context, the recent historical context of where this comes from. This what this film is many ways a throwback to films to programs that were started really with the Clinton administration in the U.S. And there was a British offshoot called the Fathers Direct, which is now called, I believe, the Fatherhood Institute. And they took place in many state governments in the U.S. and there was a Canadian program and many foreign countries. And there was all this rage about fatherhood, and we were told about how important fathers were. There were conferences, there were books, there were videos, there were films about it, propaganda in the schools. Fathers are important. Fathers are, all the social pathologies connected with fatherlessness, the violent crime and truancy and educational failure and substance abuse and all of these things. So we heard this again, like you said at the beginning, this wholesome message about how important fathers were, not just to men, not just to men and to women as a matter of personal fulfillment of life, but as a social institution. That without the breakdown of fatherhood and the breakdown of families was causing all these horrible social pathologies, which a little thought would lead to the conclusion that just about all domestic government spending is being devoted to problems and pathologies that are being caused by fatherlessness. So we got this great message, but we also got in the 90s and 2000s this message that fathers were the cause of it. They were abandoning their children. And I think we need to understand where this came from, why this happened in the 90s. And there were several connected developments, which have none of which have gone away. They're still with us today. First of all,
Yeah.
the crisis of fatherhood, the pathologies, the crime, the substance abuse, and so forth were just becoming out of control. And so they had to do something about it. So Al Gore started this program in the White House. Like I say, it was imitated by others. In the Bush administration, the conservatives relabeled it as a healthy marriage program. So it was no longer fatherlessness, it was marriage promotion. And they said it's important for us to promote fatherhood, to restore fatherhood, to encourage good fathering, to encourage. Oh, and the one buzzword was responsible fatherhood. And there was nowhere in any of this where it was explained how government officials could restore or encourage or promote fatherhood or good fathering or any of this stuff. So it was all a very feel-good thing, but everybody said we had to do it. And there was one crisis was, as I say, this breakdown of order. But there was another crisis, connected crisis, which was going on, and that was the explosion of the welfare rolls. The welfare rolls were just exploding. It was becoming impossible to finance. Something had to be done about it. So President Bill Clinton, and to some extent, I believe his counterpart in the UK, Tony Blair, started this program called, under Al Gore, with Al Gore, about, well, he started welfare reform. The idea was to reform the welfare system, to reduce the welfare rolls, to get the cheats and the lazy people off the welfare, and so how did they do this? Well, they did it by shifting the onus, the burden of paying for welfare from the taxpayer to the fathers. And this was part of where the lie came from, that fathers were abandoning their children. What you had to do is you had to shift it so the taxpayers would not pay for the welfare anymore. It would be the fathers who would pay for it through child support. So what they did was they increased the child support system, the child support collection system. They perpetrated this lie that fathers were abandoning their children and that the child support system was simply a way to get fathers to pay for the children that they had abandoned. And the other thing that they did during this time, and this is important because you talked about how behind all of this is feminism, behind every dimension of this, whether it's the divorce courts or the child support system or the welfare system, the feminists created all of it. But what they did was they created a feminist gendarmerie. They created a feminist police force to collect child support. And they created this massive army of enforcement agents. And I don't think it's ever reached the same dimensions in Britain or any other country except Canada. Canada has a similarly repressive authoritarian system for collecting child support. But what it did was it created a feminist police force, a feminist leftist police force, who were in charge of going out and collecting child support from these so-called deadbeat dads who had abandoned their children. And the other mythology that grew up at the same time, and the other feminist gendarmerie, was the lie, first of all, of child abuse. The fathers were responsible for child abuse, which didn't fly very well because it was quickly understood that in fact single mothers are the ones responsible for most child abuse. So they shifted the burden to domestic violence. Domestic violence. So they created a feminist gendarmerie to do three things: to collect child support, to um, to deal with child abuse, and number three, to crack down. All of them are described as crackdowns. Crack down on deadbeat dads, crack down on child abusers, crack down on domestic abusers, domestic violence, all of which were supposedly perpetrated by men. And this is where this came from. This, the Me Too thing came about simultaneously. There were parallel developments in the universities with rape, campus rape, and in the military with rape allegations and accusations against men. So all of this vilification of not only fathers but men in general came to some extent out of this welfare system, specifically the American welfare system, and then the American divorce courts. So I think young men may not realize today that this is the background to all of this. And and it's shifted. It's not so much the men abandoning their children anymore, as you and Bradley both say. It's more nowadays the feckless men who won't marry in the first place, because they found out that they can be turned into criminals through the child support and domestic violence systems. So now they're not marrying at all, and they're being scolded by and nagged by Carlson and others, tradcons, not to pay their child supports, although that too, but to get married in the first place, put their head in the noose, put in the lion's jaw, and forget about all these feminist police persons who are going to find some pretext to arrest them. Just go ahead and get married, and somehow it might work out, maybe somehow.
Yes, that's exactly
So
right. And also
I
there,
don't know if you want to comment. Either of you want to
well, like we've been stressing here,
go ahead. Yeah, please.
okay, not only the people who are men who are choosing not to get married, it's also men who have no choice because they are been forced into celibacy. They cannot meet a woman. They cannot have a girlfriend in the first place or get a date, let alone get this going. So all of this is ignored in this documentary and also the subsequent follow-up podcast that he had with what's his name here again? Terry Schilling.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's all of this is
The
just simply
producer of the first.
yes, this is glossed over in the entire episode. And also, what they did mention also were those, if I recall correctly, there was one man, perhaps you two remember his name. He mentioned what I call chucking money at people, more financial incentives for people to form families when we know that it has not worked. And it will not work. And also, we should say here also that was the driver of the driver of the deregulated sexual market is also feminism, because the feminists were the the strongest enforcers of the sexual revolution. That is what has created this matriarchal mating system, which we call the sexual marketplace, to get all family vetting, all paternal authority out of the approval of, well, you can't even call them suitors these days. I don't know what you call them. Men trying to get dates or men who are referred to as players. And also there's something that has emerged in this sort of sexual environment is that, as you recall, Stephen, maybe you remember this from Dr. Johnson's episode about the red pill, is that there is also a differentiation in the sexual market. And I think it was a game that was played in the office regarding the classifications of men by women, screw, marry, kill. And like Dr. Johnson mentioned in that red pill video, that there is a difference between men who women want to screw and who women want to be fathers, who they want to marry. Marriageable men are not the same men as who they want to screw, so to speak. So I think that this has to be taken into consideration also when analyzing the sexual market, because as Dr. Johnson and many other people have realized, is that there's this sort of cycle that, again, not all women, but a chunk of women who are ordinary or attractive will play this sort of trajectory in their lives. Well, they will date the so-called alpha men, and we know what date means. And then when that sort of young and fun period of their lives are over, now they're looking for a husband after all that so-called fun, or the inability to nail down the so-called alpha. And many men have already realized this. So why are they going to? I think that Devlin said that he met a man who said that if they don't want the kitten, I don't want to be the cat. that men are realizing that when they turn 30 years old or above, that they don't want to be the cleanup man for all this chaos that has gone on before them.
Yeah,
That's
very
what I have to
true.
say about it.
Yeah,
I think
no,
so
I
many
think you're right.
Good.
Go ahead, Rick.
so many
Oh,
issues have
please.
just been mentioned. I think my brain is overloaded.
Well, what do you think?
Some 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 minutes ago, I thought Stephen mentioned the Fatherhood Institute, so I just had a little flag in my brain to come back to that as to exactly what the Fatherhood Institute actually is. This is Adrienne Burgess, isn't it, if I remember correctly? And
Adrienne Burgess. Yeah.
yeah, the Fatherhood Institute is a self-confessed progressive feminist outfit. I mean, it yes, it looks, just as
Yes.
I was saying earlier on, it looks like it's sympathetic to men and fatherhood issues. But if you look on their website, even today, you can see that
Uh,
they've got pages there on we must do more to improve the equality of women in the workplace. And there's pages on,
yeah. I saw that.
incredibly, there is pages claiming that the majority perpetrators of infanticide are men, which, as you just mentioned, Stephen, is simply false. In fact, in English law, it's a nonsense because in English law, 100% of infanticide is women because it's an offence defined
Is women.
as being the killing of a child under 12 months old by the mother, incidentally. So how they can write that on their
Oh,
website beats
interesting.
me. But even if you don't use the word infanticide and just talk about killing of children under 12 months old, it's women overwhelmingly that do that. And women are the majority of those responsible for child deaths in the home. And contrary to what they say
And
on the
mostly single mothers, I would add.
yes, it's worse. It's
I
worse
think
with
mostly almost entirely single mothers. Yeah.
well, not entirely.
Not married women for the most part.
It's
Yeah,
it's
I don't think.
it's well, it's both, but the single mothers. I mean, I once went through an exercise of trawling through the serious case reviews in the UK, so some years ago now, 7 or 8 years ago,
Mhm.
because I was trying to counter a piece of propaganda put out by Women's Aid. They've done this several times. They did it again recently. They write reports called things like 12 child homicides or 19 child homicides. And what they do is they trawl through 10 years of serious case data and just find the
Yeah, yeah,
cases where it was a man notionally on contact that has
yeah,
killed a child. And there are such cases. The cases they found were genuine and egregious, but it's such an extreme degree of cherry picking. I lost my rag with it once and thought, well, I'm just going to
yeah,
spend a few months trawling through thousands of cases, and let me tell you, it's not an edifying experience because you're talking about every single case is a dysfunctional family
Mm,
with violence and drug
yes.
addiction, all of
Hmm.
them, right? As soon as you just
yeah,
start going through it, you realize these cases are not going to tell you anything whatsoever about the typical family court case. And yet, that is, of course, how it's being used. Because they use this to try and shut down contact
right.
in the family court. That's what it's the extreme end of the Vogue narrative. It's horrible. Anyway, I'm
And
losing
by
my.
the way, interestingly, uh, well, the
But yes, I
mainstream
mean,
media do the same thing.
the outcome
I've
of
traced
that,
the
the
same.
outcome of that trawl was that it confirmed that it's single mothers are most to blame, and mothers in general are implicated more than either fathers or other men combined. So yeah.
Yeah,
So the Fatherhood Institute is an example of what is a progressive feminist outfit looking like it's something else in
could
order to mislead those who are not versed in these issues. So I'm emphatically agreeing with what you were saying, Stephen, that you've got to really know the history and be able to look behind the moral smoke screens that are put up. in order to know what's really going on. And sorry, the other
Could
thing
I
I
just
meant.
can I make a yeah, go ahead. I just
Well,
wanted to comment about what you were sorry.
you talked about the child, what we in the UK call the child maintenance system. And the and I don't know how bad it is in the States. I know in the States you can be put in prison if you fall behind it. We don't have imprisonment for debt in the UK anymore. Thankfully, we got rid of that in the Dickensian era. But it is a draconian system, and they do have, just as you were saying, it's a feminist police force, really. They they have powers to confiscate your goods if you're not paying. And there is some work being done by amateurs like me. It wasn't done by me, but there's work being done to look into just how egregious that system is in terms of what the deaths are of payees, because you can raise freedom of information requests on the CMS to ask them, from how many payees, how many have died, and what sex are they, and what age range are they. And it was shown from that the the death for the same sex and the same age range, the death rate of payees into the CMS system is 3 times that in the general population. And even worse, if you're in arrears on your child maintenance system, that factor goes up to a factor of 17 times the death rate, staggeringly. So there's an implication there that these deaths are either suicide or effective suicide through substance abuse. But because we don't know, that's a level
Yeah.
of detail you can't get from the CMS. We just know what the raw death data is, which is extremely suspicious. So we may not put men in prison, we just kill them instead.
Yes, and as a
Right. Yeah. Well, there have been a number of cases in both the US and North America and Canada where it has been quite documented that impossible child support awards and the certainty of being criminalized and made homeless by a child support award um, has driven men to suicide. I mean, that's been very clearly
Yeah, I mean, this is
demonstrated in many
why this is
cases.
why those
Um,
in
could I?
arrears are this is why those in arrears are particularly badly affected, because what typically happens is the reason why they're in arrears is they were originally paying, and then the CMS just comes along and spuriously puts up how much they have to pay, and they physically can't pay,
Yeah.
and that's what finishes them off.
Yeah. Yeah. In
So
other words, the police are making the laws, right? Could I just go back to what you were saying about the Fatherhood Institute?
yeah,
Because there's a number of these organizations that people need to give. National Fatherhood Initiative, and they never do anything. Of course, none of them have ever done anything to alleviate the fatherhood problem. There's a lot of these organizations, especially in America. Some deal with fatherhood, some with marriage, some with families. Focus on the family, Family Research Council, National Organization for Marriage, International Organization for Marriage. There's a whole slew of them. They lose every one of their battles. They never have done anything to alleviate any of the crises of marriage or fatherhood. But one of the striking things about them is now the American one is not as openly feminist as the British version, the Fatherhood Institute. But what they do, but they try very hard not to offend the feminists, and they fail. They fail. The feminists are very shrewd about this. They attack these organizations, even though they don't really do anything about the problem. But the very fact that they talk about fatherhood, they talk about the family, they talk about marriage, um, even when it's feminist approved party line, the feminists still attack them and make them sound like patriarchs and father. They call them fathers' rights groups, which they're not. And so the feminists will go on the offensive against these organizations, some of which are government funded, by the way, and they will make it sound like they are, and it's very clever tactic by the feminists because they're not pushing a father's rights line at all, but the feminists will attack them for doing so. So the feminists are very effective at cowing and intimidating Anyone who even talks about the politicians, especially the importance of fatherhood, even in a very abstract sense.
Yes.
Yes, yes, that's right, and they are very good at doing that. I agree, and it's quite distressing. They've got a long track record. But just to bring it back to the Tucker Carlson so-called documentary, I mean, this is why those of us that know about these things and have a history of knowing about these things get so hot under the collar. Some people might think we're reacting sort of a bit over the top, but no, it's because when you know the context,
No,
it's a truly egregious thing to see come, especially since it's not coming actually from a feminist axis. It's coming from the traditional conservative
Mhm.
axis. And this is something I sort of meant to mention before, that
yeah,
this is something that you've talked about a great deal, Stephen, and written about, is the failures of mainstream conservatism. And this is yet another instance of it. Mainstream conservatism will not name the problem because it's gynocentric. That's
yeah.
the issue. That's what lies behind all this. Actually, is gynocentrism. That's the fundamental problem that lies behind all of it, and is what lies behind feminism ultimately in terms of its psychology.
Yes. And something else that was not
Yeah, no, that's very striking in the Carlson. Go on. Go ahead, Bradley.
oh, I didn't want to
Go
interrupt.
ahead.
Go ahead. I'll wait.
Okay, I was going to say what very striking in the Carlson, both the Carlson films, is they will criticize feminists in a very abstract way on abortion or, women in the workplace or wages or something like that. That doesn't endanger them in any way, but they won't go into the role of feminism in the destruction of marriage and the destruction and the divorce system and the welfare system and all these other things. It's almost like it doesn't exist. So it's very striking. And of course, they want to play they want to play the knight in shining armor. They want to play the chivalrous man. So there's, it's men are, or male behavior at least is the cause of all this. Female behavior is above uh, criticism, is above scrutiny even. And I mean, it's like they tout their Christian credentials, but it's almost like women are not are above the status of sinners. Women cannot commit sin. They're
Yes,
like
and it's
they're like
it's
the
essentially
Virgin Mary, born without sin. Go
it's
on.
essentially it's essentially cowardice that drives it,
Yeah.
because sometimes you suspect they do know what the issue is, but they don't want to go there. The other thing I
Yeah.
wanted to raise is going off slightly in a different direction, but equally important, I think, is we were skirting around the issue of the way these things snowball as generation gives rise to generation, and fatherlessness gives rise to young men that don't know how to father and all that. So that the problems amplify generation on generation. And we've got now a situation where things are reversing. And there was I don't know if you caught it, there was a YouTube video that came out of all places, the New Statesman, on I think it was titled something like "Why do young women hate men?"
Mhm.
Because they carried out a survey on gender attitudes, well, across all ages, but focusing on Gen Z. And there's these three women in the studio.
Just to let people know, the New State, just to let people know, the New Statesman is a left-wing British news magazine. So
Yes,
that's what
sorry,
was. I
it's
saw
very,
this, by the way, and
very,
I didn't read it. But go on.
very left wing, very distinctly progressive left. So the fact that even the New Statesman is realizing that the problem is misandry, not misogyny, is quite remarkable, because that's what these three women,
Yeah.
you could see them slowly dawning on them that he got it all wrong. So their survey showed that 72% of men were favorably disposed
Yeah.
towards women, and only 7% were unfavorably disposed towards women, which is hardly the tale of rampant misogyny that we're regaled with all the time in the UK. And yet, at the same time, Well, at the youngest end, in the Gen Z end, only, oh, what was it? I think it was 15% or 12% of young women were positively disposed towards men. So, so things have reversed. I mean, and even when it came to children, women were more antenatal than men. It was the men were more keen on having children than the women, and the men were more keen on getting married. And this is particularly the case under 30. None of I mean, I think because of the organ involved, I think these were probably fairly left wing. It probably wasn't a representative sample of all women in the population. They were probably quite leftist. But none of the women that they interviewed uh, wanted to have children before 30. They were all doing the feminist thing of pushing it off into the 30s. And even if they then eventually have a child, and we know that once women get in their 30s, the probability diminishes quite steeply. But even if they manage to have one, they may well not have more than one. And that's again what's driving the decrease in average fertility, just delaying delaying the motherhood thing in favour of career. But the other thing that came out of it, of course, is just the antipathy between the sexes, and we're told that it's male antipathy towards women, but actually, particularly in Gen Z, it's the other way around, and this must be some attitude that's been acquired both through their own upbringing. I mean, if they've been brought up without a father, they're probably not going to think very highly of men, and they've been brought up in an educational system which
Yeah.
doesn't tell them very much positive about men. So the whole problem is getting worse as you go down the younger age range. And this will
And that's one
segue
striking thing.
this will segue very nicely into if we ever get to talk about J.D. Unwin and Co.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely, and Sulikovsky and that. Yeah, well, the other striking thing about Carlson's video is it doesn't offer any solution. I mean, there's nothing, there's no way out of this. It's just nagging and scolding men, and presenting sentimental, sloppy, romantic pieces about what a wonderful thing fatherhood is and how good it makes you feel. I mean, it's a little more than that, and like you say, it's entirely true. But sentimentality alone and romanticizing this is not gonna solve the problem. You've got to look at it in a hard-nosed way, and you've got to come up and there's nothing in the video about government policies. I mean, you're right. Feminist ideology is behind all of it, but especially feminist ideology as applied and implemented in government policies. And there wasn't a word about that in the videos. It's just striking. And this is a journal. And the other maybe worth mentioning is that on other topics, Carlson is very good. He practices, I think, some very good journalism. He does most of his videos, most of his commentaries involve some defective government policy that needs to be brought to our attention so that we can have an outcry about it and we can remedy, we can rectify the defective government policy and make things good. And he talks about war, he talks about the economy, he talks about censorship and free speech and all these things, and he's always spot on. I mean, as far as I can see about the need to change the government policy, and that's what a good journalist should do. But on this, it's just striking. It's just all kind of sentimental slop about some guy talking about his dad and his children and
Yeah,
how much he
yeah.
loves them.
Yeah,
And
I thought that
yeah,
was a real turn off. I didn't like the way in which he was approached. I mean, I'm a rather dry old academic, so I prefer that approach. And somebody talking about his own dad it's not the way you approach a large scale sociological phenomenon. Is talking about your own family, really. But so
Right.
yeah, It was
Yeah,
right, and you're quite right, Stephen. The point you're making is that there was no offer of a solution, and there couldn't be because he didn't name the problem. And you've got to diagnose the disease before you offer a treatment, and he didn't diagnose the disease, so he didn't get off square
exactly.
one.
Right. And also,
Exactly.
well, yeah, and I want to circle around back to what you were saying before. You took the words right out of my mouth because when I was going to say something, we got a little jumble there that you just mentioned the misandry that is so common in the younger generation. And also, if you look at the lyrics, even in music and the portrayal of men in pop media, the lyrics even are seriously hostile to men. I'm not sure which pop singer recently had a concert in which she was actually saying something very hostile to men on stage to an audience of probably thousands of people. I mean, I think that was Sabrina Carpenter. If it's not her, I will stand corrected, but I believe that it was her. And maybe the people viewing this can correct me in the comments. However, this is a big problem too. And it's also inculcated, as you said, in the schools and also in the household as well. Because even in the homes that do have dads, I mean, I guess there are dads that are physically present, but as we've said in some of the other videos that we've had, that some dads have been turned into wives, so to speak. And that is not a good dynamic for the household either. For the children, and this is what goes on, not in every household, but in many households, and I have the personal observation of that as well. So this is a very big problem, and also I do agree with you that as soon as the several minutes in, not even far into the episode, several minutes in, I saw this man with this large family. I think that he has seven or eight children. And I think it's great that he has eight children. But a man in this day and age, a young man, will look at this and say, oh, wow, that's great for you, pal. You have a large family of eight kids. I don't have enough money to have one kid. I can't get a date. Why are you showing off your big eight-child family to me when I can't even meet a woman? And I believe that might be he seems like a so-called nice person, this Schilling, but I think that was done on purpose. I think the fact that he was showcasing this huge family was done on purpose.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, his the family he came from had 10 children.
10, yes.
I think he's just had his eighth, and I think he said he was heading for 10 or
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a bit like showing off, doesn't it, in,
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this day
yeah,
and age?
and also there was very little mention of the economic position of men, no mention of Title IX, no mention of anti-male discrimination all across the board. So we're going to tell a bunch of men to have large families when they can't even support themselves and they have a hard time even buying a home, which he did mention the housing market, I think, a little bit in that documentary and the follow-up podcast, which is a whole problem in itself. But you'll see, he'll mention BlackRock, but he will not mention the economic positions of men themselves. Only these big bankers and big financial hotshots that are monopolizing the housing market. But how are we going to get men's economic positions stronger to support their wife, to support their
Yeah,
children? Never ever
absolutely.
going towards that problem.
Yeah, that's right. I mean,
Yeah.
I alluded earlier to mapping out the various pathways by which which can lead to fatherless or simply not being a father, and that is, of course, one of them. I mean, one of the many things that can happen is a woman may have a relationship with a man. She may get on with him perfectly well. She has a child, but she doesn't want to marry him. Why? Because he's not a financial good prospect. And are you familiar with Melissa Kearney's book,
Oh,
the two parent privilege?
I
And
saw I
she
saw
Heard of
goes
that.
she goes
Yeah.
go.
she goes into this in a lot of detail, and she does a good job. She's an economist, so she takes the economist angle on it, and she does a good job of presenting, the case for it's both the relative and the absolute decline of male earnings that has promoted, you know, single parenthood and hence fatherlessness in many cases. So that's yet, and I mean, I'm agreeing with you again. That's yet uh, another thing to take into account in terms of how this can come about, fatherlessness can come about, and what's the role of feminism in that? because that sounds like something completely different. But no, because yeah, there may be
Mm.
many reasons why men are not doing well, and it's to do with, the international marketplace and the outsourcing of manufacturing and all that. But feminism has played its part in that because, it's encouraged women to enter the workplace in a way that they compete with men. And I don't know much about economics, but do know the basics of supply and demand. And if you oversupply workers, then wages will drop. And in real terms, I think that's what's
Right.
happened. It's notorious now, isn't it? And in that interview that Schilling did yesterday with Tucker, he mentioned that it needs two earners now to pay a mortgage, whereas it used to only require one. And that's true, and it is egregious. But to what extent is feminism implicated in that for the reason I just described? I mean, I think it is not the sole reason, but it's implicated in it. So whatever of these
Yeah.
pathways you look at, there's always a feminist influence to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the wages make the women more, as Amneas points out, the high salaries for women make them more divorce prone. They are, it makes them independent. That's what they want, independence. Carlson and his guest ridicule this idea of independence. They said, "Oh, you're going to work for a corporation in order to be independent." Um, isn't that silly? Working at a bank, working at a cashier, and for J.P. Morgan in order to be independent. Well, they're kind of missing the point. What the women want independence from is men, is their husbands. They want independence from the father of their
Yes.
children. That's what they want. George Bernard Shaw said that somewhere. He said, "The secret desire of every woman is to have a child without a father, without being yoked to a man." And Amneas says something similar. So that's the kind of independence they want, and of course the wages and the affirmative action and all that makes them more prone to divorce. So you're right. I mean, there's many different angles by which the feminists have are undermining fatherhood, families, marriage, and the rest.
Yes, and I also
I also I,
go ahead.
So I just want to make one point real fast. What you said about the invoking bringing in your own family as an illustration of everything, which Carlson also does. Not only his guest, but he does it himself. And that's actually a fairly feminist tactic. Feminists do that all the time. When you're having a debate, they say, "Well, I'm not like that," or "My family isn't like that," or "I have a friend like this." And of course, how can you answer that? You can't answer. You can't. You can't debunk. There's no way you can answer. You can't cite a statistic.
No, no, it's
You can't
it's
answer because it'll sound like you're disparaging his family.
no, it's the
Go
old
on.
lived experience trick. Yeah, you can't challenge my lived experience because you wouldn't know what it was. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, and
Yeah,
also it's emotional
yeah,
manipulation, and feminists do this all the time. And I alluded to the women's aid sort of 12 child homicides and all that. It, it's not rational because it's so statistically lacking in any significance because the numbers are so small, but it has immense emotional impact. And when Women's Aid produces these reports, they prepare in advance and they get a debate in Parliament centered around the report they produce, which of course is not a debate. It's a monoculture of opinion driven by their report. And the MPs then merrily just trot out
yeah,
the same lines that Women's Aid have fed them. None of them display uh, any rational detachment or questioning, well, how characteristic is it? No, they just go along with the emotional pull. And if there are any MPs in Parliament that know the truth, they're cowed into silence and don't bother even turning up at the debate. I've seen this time and time again. It's absolutely infuriating, and it's another instance of not wanting to name the problem and just collapsing to the feminist onslaught. And what lies behind it all is They don't want to criticize feminism. They don't want to be seen or thought to criticize women and called a misogynist or a wife beater or whatever. And it won't do. It's moral cowardice.
Yes.
The European Parliament does the same thing, by the way. It's got to be the most matriarchal institution on earth. Sorry, Bradley, you were trying to say something earlier.
Yes.
Bradley, did you want to add something earlier?
I actually kind of a little bit thrown off as we were talking here, but I think it might come back to me. But we're going to be continuing this conversation. I hope to continue what we're talking about here because it does require one more or several episodes.
Anyway, Rick, I think it's been a great show, and thank you for appearing with us. And we'll have to have you back to talk about Unwin and Sulikovsky and some of the others as well.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that. It's an interesting area, and I'll present it in a way that's present it flat-footedly as an academic, and also critique it because it's not wholly writ, of course. It may be right, it may be wrong. We'll see what people make of it. And yeah, I've enjoyed this session. I'm apologise if I was talking over people to some extent. I think there was a bit of a delay here and there. We're all having problems with that. But yeah, I agree with you, Bradley. There's an awful lot here that we could talk about these things for a long time. I mean, I was a trustee of a charity that attempts to help non-resident parents, which means fathers in principally, for many years, which recently folded due to lack of money, by the way. But I mean, that was an experience in itself, and I've waded through literally thousands of these case histories because we had about 700 men per year on the books. So when I say thousands, that's literally true, and so that all the things that Stephen was very ably summarising there earlier on, I know from first-hand experience are emphatically true, and levels of suicidality are extremely high amongst these now. Anyway, I'm going off on them on again.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We want to thank you for being here, and obviously there's a lot to deal with here. And where can people find you? And we will include your contact information, your website in the description of this video. So where can they find you?
I blog on empathygap.uk, and you can find my books, The Empathy Gap, The Illustrated Empathy Gap, and The Destructivists on all good retailers, including Amazon.
Yes, I am interested in reading that. I have read several of your blog pieces, and I'm interested in reading your book. So thank you for being with us today. And tune in and subscribe to A Male Space on YouTube, and tune into the Mansplainers if you want cutting edge content on men's issues and sexual politics. Thank you for being with me today.